For hours, that cat remained lying on the cold station floor, ignored by hundreds of hurried feet. Suitcases passed by, announcements echoed, trains arrived and departed, and no one stopped. Some looked for a second and looked away. Others pretended not to see. The cat no longer meowed. His tired body seemed to have accepted the cruel rhythm of that place. Those who do not board are left behind. When the last train announced its departure, the noise filled the air like a final warning. The board doors were beginning to close. Time was running out, and it was exactly at that moment, when everything seemed decided, that someone finally noticed what everyone had ignored. For days, that station was the cat's entire world. Not a world of shelter, but a world of constant passage, where no one stays long enough to notice what is dying in the corner. He first appeared as a shadow between benches and columns, looking for scraps, trying to warm himself near the entrances where the air seemed less. Biting. Over time he stopped hiding, not out of courage, but out of exhaustion. The sound of the loudspeakers, the dragging of suitcases, the hurried footsteps, everything became a current against which he no longer fought. People had reasons not to stop. At least that's what they told themselves. They were late, they were tired, they were in a hurry. Some even looked twice, felt a quick tightening in their chest, and moved on with the same silent phrase. Someone will help. But someone never arrived. The cat grew weaker in a discreet way, as if he were fading away in the middle of the crowd. He didn't draw attention. He didn't make a sound. And in that station, what doesn't make a sound doesn't exist. Every day, the cat occupied a smaller space. First, a corner between two benches. Then, the side of a column. Then, the floor near the yellow line, where the heat from the trains passed for a few seconds and vanished. He learned to measure danger by the sound of the doors, by the whistle, by the tremor of the ground. He learned to shrink back when someone passed too close. He learned to expect nothing more than another day. The station functioned as always, and he was there as if he were part of the floor, something to be circumvented, not something to be cared for. But on that specific night, something changed in the air. There was less movement, fewer conversations, fewer laughs. The clock seemed louder. The announcement of the last train cut through the space like a definitive warning. For most, it was just the end of the day. For the cat, it was the end of a chance. When the last train departs, the place empties, and when the station empties, the cold truly arrives. If this story has already started to grip you, leave your like now. It helps the channel a lot to keep going. Subscribe as well, because I have a dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers, and every subscription makes a huge difference to me. And tell me in the comments, from which country are you watching this story? The cat learned to recognize time through sounds, not by the clock on the wall, nor by the echoing announcements, but by the rhythm of the people. In the morning, the steps were fast and nervous. In the afternoon, heavier. At night, tired. Each variation said something about what would come next. In that station, time never stopped, but the cat felt when it began to run out. In the beginning, there was still curiosity in his eyes. He observed the faces passing by, trying to identify any sign of attention, a change of direction, a longer look, a minimal slowdown. Sometimes this happened, but it never transformed into action. The cat learned all too quickly that human curiosity does not mean care. It only means momentary awareness. With the passing hours, his body began to feel heavy. The station floor was hard, cold, indifferent. The cat alternated positions, trying to relieve the pain in his joints. He lay down, sat up, tried to curl up. Each change required more effort than the last. He no longer remembered when he had last eaten something that truly sustained his body. Occasional scraps were no longer enough. The world demanded energy he did not have. The suitcases kept passing. wheels dragging, tapping lightly against his paws, forcing him to move back a few centimeters. He no longer reacted with a start. He simply adjusted his body slowly, like someone who understands that complaining changes nothing. Some people offered automatic apologies, without looking down. Others didn't even do that. The cat no longer expected kindness. He only expected not to be hurt. The station had different smells throughout the day: spilled coffee, machine oil, cheap perfume, sweat. At night, the smell changed. It became more metallic, colder. The cat felt this in his nose and chest. It was the sign that movement was decreasing. When movement decreases, loneliness increases. And loneliness, there, was accompanied by risk. He crawled a few meters to a metal bench, seeking protection against the wind that was beginning to blow through the corridors. The bench was too cold, but at least it offered something to hide behind. The cat curled up, closing his eyes for a few seconds. The constant noise of the station began to blend into a single, almost hypnotic sound. It wasn't rest. It was exhaustion. At one specific moment, a child pulled the hand of the adult accompanying them and pointed at the cat. They said something low, something he didn't understand, but he felt it in the tone. The adult replied quickly, pulling the child back to the path. There was no stop. There was no long explanation, only continuity. The cat opened his eyes for an instant, then closed them again. That was nothing new. It was just one more confirmation. When the announcement for the last train sounded for the first time, the cat did not react. Not yet. The sound echoed loud, metallic, repeated in 2 languages. For humans, it was a functional warning. For the cat, it was one sound among many. But as the movement began to decrease more sharply, something inside him noticed the change. The space seemed larger, the air emptier. He tried to stand up to change places, but his legs failed for a second. His body trembled slightly before stabilizing. The cat breathed deeply, leaning back onto the floor. There was no panic, only the silent realization that something was different. The exhaustion now was deeper, heavier, as if it were glued to his bones. Some employees passed by, talking among themselves, checking watches, organizing things. None of them stopped. None of them seemed to notice the cat. He was not part of their function. He was not part of the logic of that place. The station existed to take people from one point to another. Those who had no destination did not fit there. The announcement for the last train sounded again, closer, more definitive. The cat opened his eyes and followed the final flow of people running to the platform. Hurried steps, tense voices, banging suitcases. In a few minutes that excess of movement would disappear, and then only the cold, the silence, and he would remain. The cat felt his body begin to cool down faster. He tried to curl up even more, but there was no longer much room for it. His head felt heavy, his vision blurred for moments. He blinked slowly, struggling to stay awake. There was no explicit fear. There was something closer to acceptance, as if he had understood that this station was never a place to stay. When the doors of the last train began to close, the sound echoed through the nearly empty space. The cat did not move. He no longer had the energy to react to major stimuli. It was at that moment, when the final noise of the departure cut through the air, that different footsteps emerged. They were not hurried. There were not many. They were few and slow. The cat did not raise his head immediately. He no longer expected anything, but the steps stopped too close to be ignored. A pair of shoes stood before him. The cat blinked, forcing his eyes to focus. The world seemed to slow down for a second. Someone was standing still, not passing, not deviating. And in due instant, when the last train was already departing and the cold was beginning to take over everything, time finally remembered the cat. The station seemed different when the last train began to pull away. The metallic screech of the wheels dissolved slowly, leaving behind a heavy, almost awkward silence. The lights remained on. but the human warmth that used to fill them was gone. The cat felt it immediately. The absence of movement was always more dangerous than its excess. When no one passes, no one sees. And when no one sees, everything can end without a witness. The footsteps that had stopped in front of him remained there. The cat blinked once more, trying to adjust his blurred vision. The pair of shoes did not move. They didn't retreat. They didn't deviate. They just stayed. It was too strange to be ignored. Even weak, the cat tried to lift his head. The effort was visible. His body responded with a slight tremor before he could hold the gaze for a few seconds. The person in front of him crouched down slowly. There was no sudden movement, no immediate attempt to touch, only a careful approach, like someone who understands that any wrong gesture could be final. The face that emerged in the cat's field of vision was marked by time. Deep wrinkles, tired but attentive. Eyes, an old gentleman, alone, not in a hurry. He observed the cat for long seconds in absolute silence. There was no exaggerated pity in that look. There was recognition. The kind of recognition that doesn't arise from abstract empathy but from memory. The old man took a deep breath, as if organizing something inside himself before acting. The cat didn't know it, but that moment carried much more than it seemed. Around them, the station was beginning to close parts of itself, gates being locked in the distance, employees' voices echoing in empty corridors. The clock marked the end of the shift. The logic of that place was clear. Everything that didn't board should leave. Everything that had no destination should not stay. The cat was the error in that equation. The old man extended his hand slowly, stopping a few centimeters from the cat's body. He waited. The cat did not retreat. Not because he trusted, but because he no longer had the strength to distrust. The touch was light, almost imperceptible. The man immediately felt the excessive cold, the stiffness of the thin body, the shallow breath. This wasn't just exhaustion, it was a limit. He whispered something low, simple words, almost like an apology to the world. He took off his coat carefully and wrapped it around the cat, protecting it from the freezing floor. The fabric was old, but warm. The cat felt the difference almost instantly. The breathing was still weak, but less painful. Even so, time was still short. The old man knew it. An employee passed by in the distance and cast a quick glance without stopping. The old man noticed. He said nothing. He had seen that look before. The look of someone who chooses not to get involved because the clock commands them to move on. He himself had been that look in other times, and that was exactly what made him stop now. With an effort, the old man tried to lift the cat. The body was too light, a weight that shouldn't be so small. The cat emitted a low sound, almost inaudible, not of pain, but of surprise. The old man adjusted the position immediately, better supporting the fragile body against his chest. Every second there seemed like a silent negotiation with time. He walked slowly down the nearly empty corridor. The station, which once seemed infinite, now seemed too large for someone carrying something so fragile. The cold began to seep in with more force. The old man quickened his pace as much as possible, protecting the cat with his own body. There was no guarantee of anything, only the refusal to let everything end there. The cat felt the gentle sway of the steps. The sounds of the station blended into something distant. Human proximity was strange, almost unreal. Part of him still expected to be put back on the ground at any moment. Life had taught him not to trust late gestures. Still, the constant heat kept his consciousness anchored to the present. The old man stopped in front of a side door. A small security room still lit. He knocked once, then again. He waited. Time seemed to stretch cruelly. The cat blinked slowly, struggling to stay awake. Inside the room, footsteps approached. The door opened partially. The old man explained quickly, directly, without drama. He pointed to the cat. He didn't need to exaggerate. The animal's state spoke for itself. The employee hesitated for a second, looked at the clock, then at the cat again. The station was closing. The rule said one thing, reality said another. After a moment, that felt too long, the door opened completely. The old man entered. The cat was placed on an improvised surface away from the cold floor. The environment was small but heated. The light was not strong but sufficient. For the first time that night, the cat did not feel the wind passing through its body. While someone dialed an emergency number, the old man remained there in silence. He didn't let go of the cat. He didn't move away. He knew that was the final limit. If help didn't come quickly, nothing else would matter. The cat breathed with difficulty, but it still breathed. Every second counted. The veterinary ambulance took longer than desired. The old man felt time weighing on every muscle. The cat, in turn, began to lose the sharpness of things. Distant sounds, blurred lights. But one thing remained clear. He was no longer alone in the middle of the indifferent crowd. Someone had stopped. Someone had stayed. When they finally took the cat away, the station was already practically empty. Doors were closing, lights were dimming. The last train was already just a distant memory. The cat was taken away from that place that never welcomed him. The old man followed, not knowing exactly what would come next, only knowing that if he had left 5 minutes earlier, none of that would have happened. And while the station closed completely, a story that almost ended there began to transform into something completely different. The journey out of the station happened in fragments. The cat was not fully aware of where he was. He only felt changes, the colder air when crossing a door, the distant sound of an engine starting, the constant swaying as he was carried. His body was too exhausted to react. Still, something held him to that moment. It wasn't physical strength. It was the unprecedented sensation of not being abandoned at the most critical instant. Inside the vehicle, the heat was different from the heat in the station, more stable, less aggressive. The cat felt the fabric beneath his body, felt firm hands adjusting his position, heard low voices talking about time, pressure, risk. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone. There was no indifference there. There was real urgency. This kept him conscious for a few more minutes. The old gentleman sat beside him, silent, with his hands resting on his knees. His face reflected weariness, but also something deeper, something that came from long before that night. He did not look away from a cat, not out of vigilance, but out of presence. He knew that in that state, any second of absence could be final. When they arrived at the clinic, the environment changed again. Brighter lights, sharper smells, hurried footsteps. The cat was taken away immediately. The old man stayed behind for a moment, watching the small body disappear through a door. That image activated something ancient within him, something that had never been completely resolved. He sat on a hard chair in the hallway and took a deep breath. The silence there was different from the station. It wasn't empty, it was expectation. While he waited, memories began to surface without asking permission, not as clear scenes, but as sensations far too familiar to be ignored. Many years before, he too had passed through places of passage, not train stations but improvised shelters, cold sidewalks, corridors where people quickened their pace upon seeing him. He too had been someone who occupied the wrong space, at the wrong time. He had been seen as a nuisance, as someone else's responsibility. He had been ignored by hundreds before anyone stopped. He vividly remembered the feeling of standing still while the world kept moving. He remembered watching shoes pass by, recognizing the sound of who was going to help and who wasn't. He remembered how the body begins to give up before the mind. That memory never fully left him. It just stayed tucked away, waiting for the moment to return. That was why he recognized a cat immediately, not just as a wounded animal, but as someone trapped in that same limbo. The old man didn't stop out of abstract compassion. He stopped because he knew, in his own body, what happens when no one stops. He knew that time is not neutral in these moments. Time chooses sides. In the hallway, someone approached and asked for basic information. The old man answered simply. He didn't exaggerate. He didn't dramatize. He said only that he found the cat in the station near the end. The professional nodded, jotting something down quickly. To her, it was just another case. To him, it was a silent settling of accounts with the past. The cat, meanwhile, underwent procedures he didn't fully feel. His body reacted automatically. Fluids, heat, monitoring. Consciousness came and went in slow waves. At times he felt something like comfort, at others just a soft darkness. There was no fear, there was exhaustion. In one of those moments of semi-consciousness, the cat opened his eyes and recognized the old man again, now seen through glass. The image was blurry but enough. He blinked slowly. It wasn't a request, it was recognition. The old man noticed, and without realizing he was doing it, straightened his posture, as if that gesture had returned an even greater responsibility to him. The hours passed slowly. The night advanced. The care continued with caution. At one point, someone came to speak with the old man. They explained that the cat was in critical but stable condition, that the prolonged cold, malnutrition and stress had pushed his body to the limit, that the next few hours would be decisive. The old man heard it all in silence. He didn't ask technical questions. He didn't ask for guarantees. He knew that some stories don't offer guarantees, only possibilities. He thanked them with a short nod and sat back down. He didn't leave. He didn't go away. He didn't try to distract himself. Staying there was part of what he needed to do. Meanwhile, the cat fought silently. There was no visible drama, just the body trying to reorganize itself after days of being ignored. Every heartbeat, every breath a little more regular, was a small, invisible victory. The world around did not stop to celebrate this, but the cat continued. When the dawn began to brighten, someone finally brought news that was a little less heavy. The cat had reacted well to the first hours of warming and hydration. He wasn't out of danger yet, but he had crossed the worst point. The old man closed his eyes for a second longer than usual. He didn't smile. He just breathed. At that moment he understood something clearly. Stopping at that station had not been an isolated gesture. It had been the continuation of something that started many years ago, when someone stopped for him. That cat wasn't just an animal at risk. It was a late response to an old debt. The cat wouldn't know this. He would never know. But he would feel the effects. He would feel the difference between being ignored until disappearing and being seen in time to continue. When the sun began to light up the outside, the station was already open again. People were passing through once more. Trains were arriving. Announcements were echoing. Life went on as if nothing had happened. No one there would know that a few hours earlier, a simple decision had interrupted a story that almost ended on the cold floor. And the cat, far from that place now, was still breathing. Recovery did not start as a straight line. It began as a fragile balance, sustained by small victories and large uncertainties. The cat spent long periods motionless, not for a lack of will, but because his body did not yet trust what was happening. Every improvement was accompanied by a silent doubt. Will this last? Experience had taught him that good things tend to disappear far too quickly. The surrounding environment was calm but strange. The smell was clean, constant, without the chaos of the station. There were no hurried steps, no metallic announcements, no biting wind blowing through corridors. Still, the cat remained alert. The habit of surviving in places of passage does not unravel easily. He would wake at small sounds, adjust his body, and check the surrounding space before closing his eyes again. The old gentleman was always nearby, but never invaded. He would sit in a nearby chair, read something, organize simple objects, and live. The cat began to recognize this rhythm. It wasn't a rhythm of urgency nor of expectation. It was constancy, something he did not know. The absence of haste was as disconcerting as the abandonment had been. In the first few days, the cat accepted food only in small quantities. His body still rejected excesses. Every meal was a test. Sometimes he ate a little more, sometimes almost nothing. Humans observed, took notes, and adjusted. The old man followed everything in silence. He did not ask for acceleration. He knew that haste had almost cost everything at the station. Now, time needed to be an ally. The cat began to recover forgotten sensations. The constant heat stopped being something strange. The soft surface beneath his body began to be recognized as safe. At certain moments, he would stretch slightly, a minimal gesture that carried enormous meaning. It was the body remembering how to occupy space without immediate fear. Still, there were relapses. On some nights, the cat would wake up agitated, breathing faster, as if he were back on the cold station floor. The body reacted before the mind. The old man noticed these moments and simply stayed there, closer without touching. The constant presence functioned as a silent anchor. It didn't solve everything, but it prevented panic from spreading. When they finally allowed the cat to be taken to the old gentleman's home, the change brought another kind of challenge. The space was small, simple, and organized in a practical way. Nothing there resembled the station. Even so, the cat walked. With extreme caution, every corner was analyzed, every shadow was checked. Life had taught him that new places require redoubled vigilance. The old man prepared a specific space for him. It wasn't a corner that was too hidden nor too exposed. It was a respectful middle ground. The cat approached slowly, sniffed the environment, and circled a few times before lying down. He didn't sleep immediately. He stayed observing, breathing, testing the silence. When he finally closed his eyes, it was for only a few minutes, but it was a start. The following days were marked by small advances. The cat began to move a little more, to cross the room with less hesitation, to lift his head when the old man entered. There was still no full trust. There was growing tolerance. For someone who almost disappeared without being noticed, tolerating presence was already an enormous achievement. The fear of losing everything remained there, hidden in minimal decisions. The cat would still shrink back at unexpected noises. He still avoided direct contact. He still chose escape routes before relaxing. The old man did not interpret this as rejection. He interpreted it as history. Every retreat was a reminder of what had happened before. On a silent afternoon, the cat decided to explore beyond the space he knew. He walked near the window and observed the street outside. People passed, cars moved, the world went on. He recognized that movement. It was the same as the station, but seen from a safe place. This difference was profound. For the first time, he observed the world passing by without being in its way. The old man noticed the cat near the window, but did not comment. He simply sat in another part of the room, respecting that moment. The cat stayed there for several minutes, then returned to his space. There was no hurry. There was no demand. Time finally did not seem like an enemy. On another night, something simple happened. The cat, still with caution, moved a little closer to the old man while he read. He didn't touch him. He just stayed close enough to share the warmth of the environment. The old man felt it, but did not react immediately. He allowed that gesture to exist without turning it into an event. The cat stayed there for a few minutes and then moved away. But that brief movement carried more meaning than any explicit demonstration. Recovery continued slowly, full of uncertainties. There was no guarantee that everything would be fine. The body still needed a care. The mind still carried deep marks. But something essential had changed. The cat was no longer facing time alone. And even with the persistent fear that everything could still end, there was now a fundamental difference. If something happened, it wouldn't be in the middle of an indifferent crowd. He wouldn't be ignored until he disappeared. Someone would be there. someone who stopped when everyone else moved on. This silent certainty began to sustain the cat in the most difficult moments, not as a promise of a happy ending, but as a base to keep trying to exist. The definitive choice did not happen in a single day. It formed slowly, almost without being noticed, as the cat and the old gentleman learned to coexist in the same space. There was no verbal promise, nor a decision announced out loud. What there was constancy. And for someone who lived at the mercy of temporary places, constancy was something far too rare to be ignored. The cat noticed the change even before understanding it. He noticed it when daily objects began to reorganize themselves around his presence, when the old man's routine began to consider his schedule, when the space that previously seemed provisional started to become predictable. There was no haste in any gesture. There was no sign that it would all end suddenly. And this, for the cat, was both comforting and terrifying. There were still difficult days, moments when the body seemed to tire faster than expected, instants when an external noise brought back the memory of the station, of the cold floor, of the final announcement echoing in the air. At those times, the cat would shrink back, as if the world could tear him away from there at any moment. The old man noticed and forced nothing. He simply remained, sometimes sitting, sometimes standing at a distance, always available, never invasive. With time, the cat began to occupy spaces that previously seemed forbidden. He walked down the hallway with more firmness. He sat in the middle of the room without immediately looking for a corner. He watched the old man prepare food, read, organize simple things. Life there was not extraordinary, and perhaps that was exactly what made it all so important. There was no constant chaos. There was no permanent urgency. Time finally was not running against him. On a silent morning, something simple happened. The cat approached the old man while he was sitting, and for the first time leaned his body against him for more than a few seconds. It was not an explicit request for affection. It was a brief gesture, almost timid, but loaded with meaning. The old man did not move. He did not speak. He did not react beyond breathing more deeply. Both understood that moment as something that did not need to be named. The station stayed in the past, but it was not forgotten. The old man returned there on another day, at another time. He observed the hurried people, the echoing announcements, the trains arriving and departing. Everything seemed the same, and that was exactly what made that story so delicate. Nothing in the world had changed. Only an isolated decision had interrupted a silent destiny. The cat at home slept in a warm place, protected from the cold that previously dominated him. He did not know what almost happened at that station. He did not know that the last train had been a cruel limit. But he felt in his body the difference between being ignored and being seen in time. He felt that now a possible tomorrow existed. The definitive choice was this: not to return the cat to the impersonal flow of the world, not to leave him again in a place where no one stays long enough to care. The old man did not see himself as a savior. He saw himself only as someone who did not repeat an old mistake, someone who decided to stop while there was still time. Before ending this story, I leave an important request. If you were moved by this journey, leave your like now. Subscribe to the channel. I have a dream of reaching 1,000 subscribers, and every subscription makes an enormous difference. And tell me in the comments, from which country are you watching this story? Not every rescue story begins with courage. Some start with exhaustion, silence, and a time that is about to run out. The cat in this story was not saved because he screamed louder or drew attention. He was saved because someone decided to slow down when the whole world was in a hurry. The station kept functioning. The trains kept departing, the people kept passing. Nothing changed for those who did not stop. But for the cat, everything changed the instant someone chose to see him while there was still time. That is the detail that matters most. Not the comfortable ending, but the exact point where a simple decision interrupted a silent loss. How many stories end every day in places of passage, without witnesses, without different choices? How many times do we believe there is still time, when the last train is already departing? May this story serve as a reminder. It isn't always necessary to do something grand. Sometimes, all that changes a destiny is stopping for a few seconds more. When we do that, we don't just save whoever is on the ground. We save the possibility of not becoming just one more person who walked straight past.